Okay, let's unpack this. We're diving into a very cool, very different source today.
Definitely different.
Yeah, forget academic papers for a moment. Our source material is actually a how-to guide for authors of narrative fiction, but this one was generated by a large language model.
That's right. We're kind of stepping inside the mind, if you can really call it that, of an AI, one that's processed just immense amounts of text.
Right.
It's seen countless stories, analyzed their structures, their word choices, all the patterns.
Yeah.
So our mission here is to understand how it sees storytelling.
Exactly. I mean, what does an analytical engine, built on identifying relationships and patterns in data have to say about something we usually think of as purely creative, intuitive? It's this surprising intersection of algorithms and creativity that we really want to explore. What key insights can we maybe pull from this unique perspective for anyone interested in the mechanics of storytelling?
Well, the introduction of the source material itself frames it really well, I think.
Right.
The LLM doesn't just read a story like we do. It sees the underlying logic, the semantic relationships, the structural framework.
It's like seeing the code behind the image.
Exactly like that.
Mm-hmm.
Humans often operate on intuition, right?
Mm-hmm.
We feel what works. The LLM, it sees why it works based on statistical patterns across millions, literally millions of examples.
So the guide isn't saying, replace human intuition.
No, not at all.
It's more about leveraging data to understand those foundational patterns. It acknowledges that sort of black box of creativity,
Right.
but suggests maybe a way to build a more robust craft around it.
Think of it like understanding the fundamental grammar and syntax of narrative itself,
Yeah.
but informed by, an analysis of basically every sentence it's ever read.
Okay, that perspective immediately gets interesting when the guide moves into part 1. It calls this section the foundational architect building your narrative blueprint.
Mm-hmm. The starting point.
Yeah, this is about the very beginning, concept generation, plotting, that kind of thing.
And it starts with ideation, but maybe not typical brainstorming. The guide called it prompt engineering for authors. It's kind of clever.
Prompt engineering, for AI.
Exactly. It's about using these highly targeted questions designed to force unusual connections, much like you'd prompt an actual AI.
Okay, give us an example from the source. What kind of prompt are we talking about here?
Well, instead of just, what if a dragon appears, which is pretty vague,
Right.
it suggests prompts like, describe a seemingly mundane object becoming the unexpected catalyst for a vast epic event. Then it forces you to specify. What is the object? Who is the character least equipped to handle it? What's the immediate and the long-term consequence?
Ah, okay. It forces that specificity and chain reaction right from the start.
Precisely. Or another one it suggests is place a historical figure known for one specific trait, let's say extreme caution, into a totally alien or anachronistic situation they're utterly unsuited for. How do their inherent traits clash with this new reality? The LLM, having data on both historical figures and, alien scenarios, can potentially highlight those clashes in a really interesting way.
That makes sense. It's also about genre analysis and trope twisting.
Yes, the LLM has analyzed countless examples of every genre imaginable. It understands the statistical frequency of tropes.
Ah, the frequency.
Yeah, so understanding conventions isn't just knowing them, it's seeing the patterns the LLM identifies. And that lets you consciously deviate in ways that feel fresh, not just random.
And building on that is what-if scenarios and consequence mapping, which ties back to the LLM's strength in seeing relationships, right?
Totally. It's not enough for X to happen. The guide pushes you, the author, to map out the immediate, secondary, even tertiary ripple effects on characters, relationships, the whole world state. The LLM can help trace those potential causality chains.
And for world building, it talks about data-driven world building prompts.
Right, suggesting generating details based on interconnected parameters. So if you introduce a unique magical system, the LLM prompts you to consider its logical impact.
Like, does it replace technology, create a new economic class, influence religion?
Exactly. It forces you to build a consistent internal logic, which makes sense because an algorithm needs consistent rules to function.
It's fascinating how it almost reduces world creation to a system of interconnected variables. That's very much how an AI would process information, isn't it? Seeing the world as a complex data set.
Absolutely. It really emphasizes that consistency and logical derivation from your initial premises.
Okay, so once you have that blueprint, that concept, you need structure. The guide calls this the algorithmic backbone of plot.
Because stories do follow patterns. We know this. Analyzing structures like Freytag's pyramid or the hero's journey from an LLM perspective isn't about rigid rules you have to follow.
It's not prescriptive.
No. It's about understanding the mathematical elegance of these structures, the optimal points for tension, for resolution, for transformation, based on how often they appear in narratives that work, that connect with readers.
The guide talks about pacing algorithms. Now that sounds like an LLM lens. It's not just speed up here, slow down there. How does an algorithm see pacing?
Well, an LLM can analyze, say, tens of thousands of texts and literally map the frequency of action sequences versus introspection, or dialogue bursts, or info dumps, page by page.
Wow.
It identifies patterns of effective pacing, like when withholding information statistically builds the most suspense, or when accelerating action creates the most urgency. It sees pacing almost like a data visualization chart, an emotional and informational flow rate.
Yeah, that's a really unique way to think about it. Not just an intuitive feel, but a statistically observed rhythm.
Exactly. And then subplot integration and weaving is about seeing how seemingly independent narrative threads can be connected, semantically or thematically. The LLM can identify relationships between, say, a character's personal struggle and the main external conflict, seeing them as potentially linked nodes in this big narrative graph.
Foreshadowing and callback mechanics fits right in there too, I guess. Planting clues early.
Is about establishing connections that the LLM sees as potential future resolution points. You're setting up variables that get called upon later to resolve the narrative equation, so to speak.
And conflict generation and escalation.
Framed as identifying the core conflicts and then systematically increasing the resistance or complexity, forcing characters to adapt. The LLM can analyze conflict types, escalation patterns across stories, and suggest variations or logical next steps to keep raising the stakes.
Then, of course, you need characters to actually live in this world and navigate this plot. The guide approaches this through character development, crafting believable entities.
Right, and it starts with archetype analysis and subversion. The LLM has seen every hero, villain, mentor archetype you can imagine. It identifies the core patterns.
So it knows the template.
It knows the template. The guide suggests using these patterns as a data baseline and then deliberately adding contradictions or unique backstories, unexpected traits, to create variations that feel both familiar, because they tap into the archetype, but also fresh. What if the chosen one is statistically the most likely person to fail? That kind of thing.
And ensuring motivation and internal logic. That sounds crucial from an AI perspective.
Absolutely. From the LLM's view, a character's actions must be logically derivable from their established desires, fears, beliefs. Even if those beliefs are flawed or lead to self-sabotage, it's about character consistency, like a function reliably returning the same output for the same input,
Makes sense. What about dialogue? Dialogue generation and voice distinction.
Well, dialogue isn't just words on a page, is it? It's data. Data that reveals character. Relationships. The guide emphasizes listening to real speech patterns, the cadence, the vocabulary, the tics that make each person sound unique, and translating that into distinct dialogue voices.
And the LLM helps how?
It analyzes vast amounts of conversational text to identify these unique linguistic fingerprints. What makes one voice different from another statistically?
It also covers relationship dynamics and character arcs, how characters interact and how they change over time.
Yeah, the LLM can essentially trace a character's internal state and external actions right through the narrative. It's like mapping their transformation journey as a data curve.
This section also includes the LLM's take on that classic writing advice, show, don't tell.
Yes, the algorithmic interpretation.
So how does an AI interpret show, don't tell?
It basically sees it as translating abstract concepts into observable sensory data points.
Okay, examples.
Instead of telling you a character is angry, which is an abstract state, you provide the data points. Clenched jaw, white knuckles, clipped speech. Instead of telling you a city is dirty in abstract description, you provide the data. The smell of stagnant water, the visual texture of grime on surfaces.
Yeah.
Maybe the sound of rats scurrying nearby.
Right, so it's breaking down those high-level concepts into their constituent sensory inputs.
Exactly. It's about providing the sensory data that allows the reader to infer the abstract state themselves.
That leads us perfectly into part 2, which is the stylistic refiner polishing your prose. Now we're really zooming in on the micro-level language.
Prose and style, the language of engagement. The guide talks about vocabulary expansion as semantic precision.
Which makes sense for an LLM.
Totally. Having access to this massive lexicon, the LLM perspective really highlights choosing the word with the exact right semantic meaning, and emotional weight.
Yeah, like the difference between someone walking versus strolling, marching, ambling, or, I don't know, trudging.
Exactly. Each word carries a different payload of information and emotion. The LLM can suggest synonyms based on the precise nuance you're aiming for.
And sentence structure variation.
The LLM sees clear patterns in sentence length and structure across prose that really engages readers. Varying them isn't just arbitrary, it creates a rhythm, a flow. It avoids that monotonous repetition that can make a reader's eyes glaze over.
What about figurative language? Figurative language generation with purpose is next.
Right. The guide encourages using metaphors, similes, that kind of thing, but deliberately, to enhance meaning or evoke emotion, and crucially, avoiding cliches.
Because the LLM knows they're cliches.
Because it can identify them by their incredibly high frequency in the data. They've lost their semantic novelty through overuse. So it can suggest less common, potentially more impactful comparisons.
Sensory detail and immersion. This feels connected to show, don't tell.
Very much so. Engaging all five senses, the tactile feel of worn fabric, the exact sound of rain on pavement, the coppery taste of fear, it anchors the reader in the world. The LLM understands that providing these specific data inputs makes the whole narrative experience more robust, more immersive.
And ultimately crafting emotional resonance and evocation.
Yeah, through that careful word choice, rhythm, imagery. The LLM sees how specific combinations of words, sound, sensory inputs correlate with emotional responses in its training data. It's pattern matching on an emotional level almost.
Then there's point of view and voice.
Choosing a POV is essentially selecting a data filter through which the story gets told. Maintaining consistency is just about applying that filter uniformly. And narrative voice is about developing that unique linguistic fingerprint of the storyteller, whether it's a character or some omniscient presence.
The guide briefly touches on reliable versus unreliable narrators.
As a strategic deviation.
Right.
A way to play with that data stream being delivered to the reader.
And it circles back again to show, don't tell, reinforcing that algorithmic view with those concrete examples.
It really hammers home that idea. Provide the raw data points.
And adding subtext and implication, conveying information indirectly. Through actions, dialogue, or even silence?
Yeah, the LLM can analyze what isn't said just as much as what is, identifying patterns of inference the reader is expected to make based on the gaps.
Okay, moving into parts 3 and 4, the guide discusses the crucial iterative process. And this is where the LLM's unique capabilities might really shine, right?
I think so. Part 3, the iterative optimizer, the editing and revision process, frames self-editing as the algorithmic review.
Which makes perfect sense. This is where an LLM's pattern recognition is just incredibly powerful, identifying redundancy and repetition. Algorithms excel at spotting repeated phrases or concepts.
Absolutely.
Pacing adjustments? Well, that LLM pacing analysis we talked about could highlight areas where the flow might be statistically off compared to engaging narratives, but especially consistency checks, plot holes, character inconsistencies, breaking your own world-building rules. This seems like a pure data matching task an AI could perform tirelessly.
Exactly. It could flag, for instance, that a character mentioned having a deathly phobia of heights back on page 10.
Right.
But now they're comfortably dangling from a cliff on page 200, assuming there's no intervening character development explaining that change. It's just a simple data conflict detection for the AI.
And refining dialogue, Polish spotting, awkward phrasing, or maybe unnatural rhythms by comparing them against huge data sets of natural speech.
Yeah, and using read-aloud techniques is kind of the human way to do that same pattern recognition. Our ear catches awkward stuff our eye might miss.
The guide also stresses feedback and critique, framing it as gathering more data points on your narrative.
Right. Seeking constructive criticism and processing feedback objectively really means looking for patterns in what different beta readers are pointing out.
Yeah.
You know, if 3 people say the pacing drags in Chapter 5, that's a significant data cluster suggesting an area needs revision.
And viewing editing as these iterative improvement cycles, using those feedback data points to continuously refine the blueprint, the prose, running repeated passes of that algorithmic review.
Then Part 4 gets into advanced concepts and the LLM's edge. This includes the meta-narrative, which, from an LLM perspective, is about understanding the story on a deeper level by identifying overarching themes, symbols, and seeing how they resonate across the text, like tracking keywords and concepts.
Reader expectation management. That's fascinating from this angle. Understanding common narrative patterns lets you predict reader assumptions based on genre tropes.
And then you can choose to fulfill, delay, or subvert those expectations deliberately. It's like managing a probabilistic model of reader engagement.
And intertextuality and illusion are seen as linking your narrative dataset to other established datasets, other stories, history, myths.
Yeah, to add layers of meaning through those connections.
The guide also touches on generating creative solutions to writer's block. How does the LLM see writer's block?
Well, not as some mystical affliction, but more like a breakdown in the ability to generate novel patterns or maybe access relevant data pathways in your own brain.
So the solutions are algorithmic.
In a way, yes. Techniques like pattern interruption, like try writing from a totally different POV for a bit, forcing a new input stream.
Okay.
Or constraint-based writing, imposing artificial limits, like writing a scene without using the letter E or something, that forces the generation of patterns within a new boundary. They're ways to disrupt that stuck process and force new creative pathways.
Finally, the future of fiction, collaboration with AI. The guide positions AI as a powerful tool, beyond the guide.
Right. Using AI for brainstorming, maybe generating lists of potential ideas or variations based on your prompts. But it's absolutely crucial, and the source emphasizes this, to consider the ethical considerations in maintaining human authorship.
Yes, the guide is very clear on this point. The LLM is an engine. It processes data patterns from human creativity.
It can analyze, suggest, optimize.
But it doesn't have experiences. It doesn't have emotions or unique perspectives rooted in lived reality. The human author provides the original spark, the soul, the why.
Exactly. The AI is framed as this incredibly sophisticated assistant designed to amplify human creativity, not replace it.
And the conclusion of this guide really seems to reinforce that idea. It's not AI versus the human author. It's AI with the human author.
It summarizes that the LLM is a sophisticated analytical engine, a powerful co-pilot maybe. It can provide that statistically optimal framework, highlight patterns, spot inconsistencies.
But the heart, the unique voice, the emotional depth, the truly original insight that still comes from you, the human creator. Understanding this analytical framework, this almost algorithmic view of story, could potentially make you a more conscious, deliberate, and maybe even effective storyteller.
Yeah.
Or even just deepen your appreciation for how the stories you love are put together. So as you think about stories you've read or watched, or perhaps even stories you're trying to create yourself, here's maybe a final thought for you to consider. If storytelling does have these discernible patterns, these underlying algorithms that an AI can identify and analyze, does that change how you think about creativity or imagination? Or even just that very human experience of being moved by a fictional world, something to mull over, maybe explore on your own?